ABC, Dave here. Texas, this time of year, it's just hot, hot, and more hot. Be nice to get a little rain, but I don't think it's going to happen. Here lately, I've been started out the summer kind of in a fusion mood, really. Started listening to this classic album here. This is Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. Bought this a long time ago when I was in college, going to Texas Tech up in Lubbock, and I'd go to the library and read you know, the Stereo Review and High Fidelity magazines and stuff like that. I may have read about this in those magazines, or maybe even you know, someplace like Rolling Stone. But I think this is maybe, I know it's one of the earlier jazz albums I bought. There might be, oh golly, someone else before this, but like this, I know this is one of the more modern releases I bought, and probably one of the early ones. I even bought this before Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, and this was back in the 70s. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't ready for it. You know, I was listening to all the popular, you know, music at the time, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and you know, I don't know, Jackson Browne and Santana, and you know, all the bands that came out of Woodstock and what have you. And when I bought this, I wasn't really experienced that much into jazz, and quite frankly, it just went right over my head. I didn't know what to think of it, but and I initially bought it on vinyl and eventually picked up the CD release of it, but would come back to it, you know, year over year, because there was just something compelling about it. You know, I think this is maybe one of the first albums that kind of started the fusion movement. I don't know, I'm not really that up on all the history of it, but also one of the first albums that started the jazz rock movement. But on it, there are, like, you know, there are a lot of other accomplished musicians on here with Miles Davis. There's like John McLaughlin plays guitar. I know Dave Holland is on here as well. Along with them, I think Chick Corea plays on here, Wayne Shorter, Lenny White plays drums, Jack DeJohnette plays drums, and just a whole bunch of well-known musicians. But supposedly, from what I read online, this ensemble that Miles put together would employ, you know, 2 or 3 drummers, a couple of bassists, and 2 or 3 keyboardists, and you know, use them all at the same time, and just give them a minimal of, you know, kind of what he wanted to do, a loose framework, and then they would go in and I guess maybe, you know, hammer it out as they went along, or take a bunch of different takes on what they had done. And also there was a lot of sort of from what I've read, studio gimmickry, where, you know, the studio becomes almost like an invisible musician on it, employing, you know, like echo effects and reverb, and, you know, cutting up things and, you know, splicing them together and what have you. But it really makes for a unusually unworldly experience at times. I've also heard this album described as amorphous, which means like it's sort of shapeless or whatever, and I can totally understand that descriptor of the album. You know, it certainly has, upon an initial listening, it certainly has that you know, feel to it, and I still feel that way about it today, and that's one of the reasons that I'm kind of drawn to it, because even though I've heard the album many times over the years, you know, I put it on again and it's like something, you know, new and fresh to me. And as far as one of the Fusion albums, I think it's one of my favorite. Here's another one that is very much along that line. This is by Les McCann. This is his Invitation to Openness. And there are 3 cuts on this album. And again, Les McCann has a bunch of different musicians on here that play with him, like Yusef Lateef. McCann plays the keyboards and piano. You've got David Spinoza on guitar and electric guitar. Jody Christian plays electric piano as well. You got 2 bass players, a drummer and a percussionist, 2 drummers and a 3 drummers and a percussionist, and a William Buck Clark plays African drums and percussion. Actually, golly, let's see here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drummers and percussionists on this album. But and like I said, it's sort of amorphous too, sort of like that Miles Davis album. There's 1 cut on the first side called The Lovers, and then you've got on the second side you've got 2 wild titles for 2 songs called, the first one is Bo J Poo Boo, and the second cut is called Poo Pie Maguchi and His Friends. So you know, Les is having fun with the titles. It's all instrumental, much like the you know, much like the Bitches Brew album. So, you know, titles, I don't know how, you know, relevant that is to what the songs sound like. So I can kind of understand him, you know, naming them that or titling them that. There's a small poem on the inside of it. This is on Atlantic Records by Jonathan Melvin, called Open. It says, "Open the door, let humanity in. The flow of feelings, the joy that is our birthright, the love that always exists between all of us." And this album came out in the 70s, and it's still, like I said, fresh sounding today. Here's another one along the same lines, as far as I've shown this one before. This is a Herbie Hancock sextet. Again, this is another one of those albums, much like Bitches Brew, which Herbie, of course, has been in, you know, Miles Davis groups as well. But again, this one is kind of very fusiony, kind of funky, and sometimes, you know, these albums kind of have a little bit of psychedelia in them as well. But this is another one of my favorite Herbie Hancock albums. And again, he has, you know, some of the same musicians that are on these other ones on his albums. And so if one of those albums appeals to you, this one probably will too. Yeah, it's right down my alley as well. Well, I was out looking here the other day. I went by a Dollar Tree, and I found this book, which is a biography, memoir on Herbie Hancock, Possibilities, co-written or written by Lisa Dickey. You know, Lisa Dickey. And you know, I haven't read it all the way. I've just kind of, you know, read spots of it here and there. But you may know that Herbie Hancock grew up in Chicago, and I believe I read where he had 3 siblings. But you know, started out young, playing piano as a child, and you know, it just kind of talks about him growing up and the different bands that he was in. Here he is with a bunch of keyboards, and in that upper picture you have him playing that guitar type keyboard that he would use from time to time. But yeah, it's taken me a while to get into, here he is with a nice picture with Joni Mitchell down there, and right here he's with Chick Corea. But yeah, the book was $1. Like I said, I found it at Dollar Tree. So if you're interested in Herbie Hancock, you know, you might either call Dollar Tree and see if they have any of these books. Dollar Tree's distribution is really weird. I mean, some of them will get stuff in, and other ones won't. So, you know, you just have to kind of like, you know, if you're interested, maybe call Dollar Tree and see if they have this book in, and maybe somebody can help you. It's a so far interesting book. Here's another one I played lately. Haven't heard this one in a while. This is Jaco Pastor's album. Pat Metheny, Bruce Dietmus, and Paul Bley. I wasn't familiar with this Bruce Dietmus on here. He plays the drums, and a lot of the songs on here are either by Paul Bley or Carla Bley. In fact, I think all of them except for the very last one, which is by Annette Peacock. But again, a lot of these albums, like, have taken me a while to kind of get into, and that's one reason I kind of started listening to them again here lately. Like when I first heard this album, I wasn't, you know, that taken by it when I first heard it. But over the years, and particularly here lately, you know, I've come to really appreciate what's on here. And I've always known that Jaco Pastorius was a you know, really great bass player, and it really shows on this album here. So if you're into the whole fusion thing, you've got Jaco on bass, of course Pat Metheny on guitar, and Bruce Dietmus on drums, and Paul Bley on electric piano. But yeah, it's a real well played album, and a really good album. And for the most part, it's fusiony, except towards the last, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 minutes of the album. They start playing a little bit a little bit free jazz, I'd say. But yeah, I don't know, it's a really good album. This is another one I picked up to play here recently. George Duke, Faces in Reflection. It's a 3-piece with just George Duke playing the keyboards, bass, and drums. The drum player is called Dugu, which I didn't know of, although I've got another album around here somewhere where I noticed that he had played on it. And John Hurd plays the bass on it. It's called Faces in Reflection, and it's on the MPS label, which is either the same record label as BASF or a subsidiary of it. This came out in 1974, and is very much like, you know, the fusion of that time. George Duke plays the electric piano and synthesizer. He plays a ARP synthesizer, which was one of the reasons I liked him. I used to have a small ARP Odyssey, and always enjoyed hearing what George would play, you know, on his synthesizer. This is very much kind of like if you've heard Frank Zappa's album One Size Fits All. This is very much like that, but without any vocals. I think there is one vocal on here towards the second side that I believe is George Duke singing on that vocal, but it's just one song, like I said, last cut on the second side. But overall, the music on here is really good. My only criticism is that it was pressed on this MPS label, which, like I said, is a subsidiary, or is the same music label as BASF. And I remember back in the day when I was into, you know, recording cassette tapes, that generally your TDK cassettes and your Maxells were the best brands, and sometimes Sony, they were okay. But I bought like a few BASF tapes, and I bought this new right out of the store, and it has like you know, crackles and pops and whatnot on it. And I even knew that, you know, BASF tape was kind of iffy too. I mean, like, I just don't think their quality control was very good. But if you can find it in a store fairly cheap, it's worth picking up. It's an interesting album. And then I was listening to this. This is a promo copy that I got to review. There used to be a little progressive site on the web that I wrote music reviews to, and it's not there anymore. And in fact, it went under before I got around to writing a review for this. It's Anthony Curtis' Book of the Key. It's probably less fusion and more progressive, but it may have fusion moments for it. I can't get the there. Like I said, it's more progressive. It's got like Anthony Curtis. He plays the guitar on here. Tony Levine plays, who played with King Crimson. He plays the bass and stick instrument like he does in King Crimson. You've got Mike Cannelli, I believe is his name, plays Fender Rhodes. Louis Pragazim plays the drums and percussion, and Jeff Gaither plays violin. This came out, I think, in, I don't know, 2000 sometime, 2004. But and it's since undergone a cover change. I actually like this cover better, to tell you the truth. I like landscapes. The newer cover is just kind of an abstract design. But this is kind of, I was thinking this album was kind of like a cross between King Crimson, which it kind of is, and maybe John McLaughlin, you know, the Mahavishnu incarnation of John McLaughlin. But you know, his guitar style is real muscular, and you know, it kind of gets I don't want to say free jazzy, but it gets kind of, you know, out there, and it gets kind of rambunctious. And at times, then I started thinking about it, and at times it kind of reminds me of something like you know, Sonny Sharrock, if you've ever heard of his Book of Ages CD or LP, or maybe something maybe like oh golly, Steve Tibbets, something like Steve Tibbets, but not quite so. Some of his stuff gets kind of spacey a little bit. But you know, if you've ever heard of King Crimson's Discipline era, you know, those albums that they put out, one was red, one was yellow, and one was blue. I can't remember the name of all of them. I just know that The red one was called Discipline. It's kind of like that a little bit, and I think what Curtis does here is he, you know, sets up a song and then he overdubs, you know, much like Adrian Belew did on those Crimson albums, like guitar effects that add texture and whatever to it. But it is a good album, and it kind of has some sort of Middle Eastern type of textures to it. The Book of the Key is like a 23-minute song, and then you've got The Ruins is the first song that starts out the album. It's 12 minutes, and then you've got a song on here that's sort of Middle Eastern titled. Let's see if I can say it. It's Hikmat al-Ishraq, something like that. That's 18 minutes long. So all in all, it's a pretty long album. They give you a lot to, you know, on here. Best thing I would say is, like, go to Amazon if this sounds interesting, which it is an interesting album. Go to Amazon and see if you can hear cuts of it, or particularly Spotify might have something on the album where you can listen to it all the way through. But yeah, another good album. Good revisit. So that's all I got today. It's what I've been listening to. There's a few other fusion albums that I plan on listening to. I've got them back in the back, and we'll probably maybe showcase them later. But for now, that's all I got today. So hope everybody's staying cool, enjoying their summer out there, and we'll talk to you later.